Leah Remini had something that Tom Cruise really wanted, and that was her connection with J-Lo. And by extension, the Church of Scientology wanted her connection with J-Lo. Now, J-Lo wasn't a Scientologist, but her father was. But she had managed to stay outside the Church of Scientology, thank goodness. And so her only connection really, other than her dad being a Scientologist, was her great friendship with Leah Remini. And this was a real friendship, a deep and loyal, long-lasting friendship. And Tom Cruise wanted to sort of hone in on that, particularly around the time of his pending wedding to Katie Holmes. Now, it's really interesting, before I get into the nitty-gritty, juicy bits of that wedding, as described by Leah Remini in her book, Troublemaker, Surviving Hollywood and Scientology. And surviving she had to do. This book is captivating. If you can get a chance to get a copy and read it, I highly recommend it. You can get it on Kindle as well. You're sort of taken on a journey with this feisty, loyal, smart, talented, pretty, tough girl who from her early teens was thrust into the Sea Org due to the connections that her mother made with a certain boyfriend who was a Scientologist, and that's a story just within itself. And just seeing her journey, and you wish for her, you wish that she had never got associated with the Church of Scientology, because it brought so much misery, so much restraint, so much restriction. It cost her a great deal of money. I think it may have even cost her career opportunities because she was so under the thumb. She was always having to turn up and do these exhaustive sort of study and, to be totally dedicated. You never really could get away from them. You basically, when you weren't working, you had to hand your life over to the Church of Scientology. So oppressive. I don't know how people can actually stand it, but it just proves how well she has written this book, because you feel all those emotions as you're reading her story. So it's a really strange moment in time leading up to Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes' wedding. And Leah Remini gives us a ringside seat because she and her husband were actually called over to teach them how to salsa, over to Tom's house. This is when they weren't engaged. They were just going out together. Katie Holmes was actually living there. And she was invited under the guise of dinner and learning salsa. And, she had quite a few sort of sociable outings to Tom's house. But it's very, very strange. At Tom Cruise's house, there is always Scientologists there. And it's weird that sometimes they're just treated like staff and sometimes they're treated like invited guests at dinner parties. So you wouldn't really know what standing they had, and I presume that they wouldn't really know what standing they have. And it's interesting, when you read A Billion Years by Mike Rinder and you also read Andrew Morton's book about Tom Cruise, you can see that this Scientology presence, this oppressive sort of presence of always people around, always people watching you, always people guiding you, always someone with an opinion of you. The other thing that shocked me about reading about all of this and sort of correlating all the stories was I always felt like Nicole Kidman and Katie Holmes were just pure victims of the Church of Scientology and from Tom Cruise's sort of version of love for them. But no, you can sort of see that there were many instances where they would be fully aware exactly what they were dealing with. I mean, Nicole Kidman would have been fully aware how the Church of Scientology operated, exactly what she was getting into, because that's why in the end she was sort of distancing herself. So she was fully aware. Katie Holmes would have been fully aware of how oppressive it was going to be because, like I said, there was always people with them. She basically, it sounds like in all these books, that she was basically under house arrest from the moment their budding romance started. I'm going to tell you a particular instance out of Leah Remini's book, and it is actually their wedding. And it's fascinating how they were trying to use the wedding to establish a friendship with J-Lo. So one night after Leah Remini and her husband had had dinner at Tom's house, they walked them out to the car park, and this is what Tom said to Leah. Tom said, "Hey, we have some news. You have to keep this hush-hush." And then Leah says, "It wasn't hard to guess what the news was." "We're getting married," he said, "and we want you guys to come." And then Leah describes that in the car park, she literally felt pressured to jump up and down with sheer joy and excitement, because if you weren't high energy around anything that Tom said or anything that David Miscavige said, you could be conceived of someone who was low energy, or in other words, a suppressive sort of person. So you always had to make sure that you were full of enthusiasm and joy at anything they happened to utter. But luckily for Leah, Tom seemed quite pleased with her reaction and then asked if they wanted to invite their friends Jennifer Lopez and Mark Antony to the wedding. Now this is where Leah Remini gets really confused, because she knows they don't know them. But she says to Tom, "Don't you think you guys should?" I asked, confused. "Well, we don't really know them that well," said Katie. "Right," I thought. Leah says, "Exactly my point. And you want to invite them to the wedding?" So clearly this was a giant coup, not only for Tom and Katie, because they would have a real true A-lister at their wedding, because, I mean, David Miscavige doesn't really cut it as far as Hollywood chops goes. But they would have, J-Lo at their wedding. But more importantly, David Miscavige wanted everything that J-Lo could bring to the Church of Scientology. Basically a huge population that adores and follows her, hopefully would follow her through the doors of the Celebrity Centre of the Church of Scientology. Although you can't get in the Celebrity Centre, can you, unless you're actually a star. So I guess they'd have to go round the back. So Tom and Katie's wedding took place in Rome in November of 2006, and it's quite extraordinary because Leah Remini tells you about the build-up to all of it, how her and J-Lo basically got a stylist in and they had the best time planning all their outfits for these 3 days that the wedding was going to unfold. There was going to be pre-wedding lunches and dinners and, all sorts of glamorous things happening. So they had a bit of fun getting all that ready, and Leah Remini was really enjoying all J-Lo's contacts as far as that goes. It's funny that when they actually got to Rome, poor old Leah Remini wasn't even recognised at all, because her sitcom series, The King of Queens, wasn't big in Italy, and so no one really knew who she was, which was a bit of a letdown. But everybody, of course, knew exactly who J-Lo was. Now, the whole thing is really strange, and she paints the picture so well because she brings you into the tension of it, how there was constant pressure. And once they got to Rome, they were always, the Scientologist people were always trying to separate her from J-Lo. Once she had managed to get J-Lo to Rome, they pretty much wanted to separate her and sort of push Jennifer Lopez and that towards Tom Cruise, David Miscavige and Katie Holmes. But Leah Remini stuck to her friend like glue, and besides, J-Lo wanted her to. They were really good mates, and it was just no fun for Jennifer Lopez to be at that wedding if she couldn't enjoy it with her friend. So Leah Remini started to get a little bit of stick from the Scientology world because she wasn't playing ball. She was looking after her friend, she was acting like an independent person at a wedding, and she wasn't really following orders or doing exactly what they wanted. So she started to feel this sort of tension and this cold shoulder and, a very, very uncomfortable atmosphere. So she describes in a hilarious moment where JLo wanted to make sure that all her security were in place, so that she was waiting for her security to give them the go-ahead to make their way for the actual wedding ceremony. But the Scientologists were pushing Leah Remini, you have to leave for the church now. And they wanted her to come in a crummy little van on the way up to the church with all the other Scientologists. And, they were really pushing for it to unfold how they wanted. Well, because JLo stuck to her guns about her security and waiting for her sort of heads up of when they thought it was safe to go, they were a little bit late, and that was a real black mark against them. She also describes a 20-minute wait by Tom Cruise standing at the altar waiting for Katie Holmes to appear. And I wonder then whether she was having second thoughts, or whether her father was frantically trying to say to her, okay, I've got a car ready, let's go, let's get out of here, let's grab Suri and depart. Because I'm sure that her dad was fully aware of the horror of what she was about to marry into. Now, it's interesting that her father actually negotiated, according to all these books, a massive prenup. According to Andrew Morton's book, a massive prenup of like $52 million for Katie Holmes. Now, it can be argued that maybe Katie felt that she needed to marry Tom Cruise in order to guarantee that prenup income in order to fight him at a future date for the custody of Suri. We'll never know because it's all conjecture in Andrew Morton's book. But it seems, plausible to me, because she would have to have a lot of firing power in the future in order to be able to gain custody of her daughter and make a safe getaway. So the wedding happens, and then you've probably heard the story about Leah Remini actually bailing someone up at the champagne reception sort of drinks prior to the wedding dinner, and saying, where's Shelley? And being told, you don't have the rank to ask where Shelley is. And she's really starting to, all her ideas about Scientology came to a head at this wedding, because she's realizing it's really strange. She's realizing that as a fellow Scientologist, she is being treated a lot worse than Tom Cruise, that she's expected to basically worship this man. Yet he's supposed to be only another fellow Scientologist. Yet she has to look up to him. She has to worship him. She has to revere every word that comes out of his mouth. So she's looking at this and she's thinking, well, hang on, I'm more experienced than you are. I know more about Scientology than you. Why am I having to worship and revere you? You're just another fellow actor, admittedly higher up in Hollywood, but not necessarily someone she feels a need to worship in the Church of Scientology. So she's starting to see that rules that apply to Tom don't apply to anybody else. He basically can do, say, be, whatever he likes, and according to David Miscavige, it's all good. There's always exceptions made for Tom. And she's looking at this and thinking, well, I'm not that impressed with him. Why do I have to worship and look up to him? I mean, she is a rebel. She held on to herself to the extent where she could start to see how all this was unfolding. And she could start to see just how wrong it all was. Now, she tells a really interesting story when they're at the actual wedding about Suri Cruise crying in the ladies' loo. So she said that everyone could hear Suri crying, and because she was a 7-month-old up late in a loud, crowded, dark restaurant. So she goes looking to see if she can help, right? And David Miscavige sort of gave her that meaningful sort of look like, can you go and see what's going on sort of thing. She was already in the bad books asking about Shelley Miscavige. She was already in the bad books because she'd asked for J-Lo to be moved off another table onto her table. So at this stage, she's just not in favour. So she probably felt like she needed to go and help out. And this is what she said, what she found, which is extraordinary. I found 3 women, including Tom's sister and his assistant, standing over the baby who was lying on the tile floor, which is weird in itself. I don't know if they were changing her diaper or what, but 3 women were just looking at her. So you've got a 7-month-old baby screaming and crying, lying on the tiled floor with 3 women just standing around looking at her. And she said they were looking at her like she was Ron Hubbard incarnate. Rather than talking to her in a soothing voice, they kept saying, "Suri, Suri," in a tone that sounded like they were telling an adult to get their shit together. Excuse the language, but that's what Leah Remini says. "What are you guys doing?" I asked, but she didn't wait for an answer, and she just picked the baby up and she asked about, where's the bottle? Where's a bottle for the baby? And she's holding the baby, Suri, like a normal human being would, comforting her. Now, these were the women that were standing around her were actually Tom's sister and his assistant. I don't know who the third woman was. And in Andrew Morton's book about Tom Cruise, you can see and hear that Nicole Kidman could not stand Tom's sister. She found her very invasive and intrusive, and she lived with them. I mean, oh, God. It's just, I don't know how Nicole Kidman and Katie Holmes stuck it out for so long. I just do not understand. I cannot even fathom why anyone would put up with it. Anyway, so she goes off to get the bottle of milk for Suri heated up in the restaurant kitchens, and she gives her a bottle and she's fine and she calms down as any normal 7-month-old baby would. And, if that's how Scientologists' children are all treated, I mean, heaven help them, that's all I can say. So there's other strange things that happen. When her and her husband Angelo actually entered to do the reception where the bride and groom greet all the guests as you walk into the reception, they would not shake their hand. They wouldn't look at Leah Remini and her husband, wouldn't even talk to them, actually skipped over them blatantly and sort of gushed and oozed all over J-Lo and her husband. How rude! And it was really, really obvious. But like a good Scientologist, you've been trained to think, well, what did I do? What did I do to pull that in? I must have done something wrong. And she's looking around her, and not only is Shelley Miscavige not at the wedding, she's noticing that David Miscavige's personal secretary or personal assistant is actually filling a rather strange role, like his date at the wedding. Now, Leah Remini thinks that, if things were going normally, that seeing she was just a Sea Org sort of personal assistant, that she should just be standing nearby David Miscavige in case he would need anything. But she was very much sitting right next to him and acting like she was his date. And so Leah Remini was appalled because she could also see Sea Org members drinking. Now, Sea Org members are not supposed to drink. And when she went and confronted a young Sea Org worker about it, he said, oh, well, when in Rome, and kept drinking his red wine, which good on him, because when you hear the sort of life Sea Org members have, I bet he was making hay while the sun shone, because they had to grab any little bit of pleasure, any bit of life that they could before they were sent back to the misery of the Sea Org organisation, I would imagine. And actually, Mike Rinder says a very interesting thing about the minister that actually oversaw Tom Katz's wedding. So in November 2006, Norman Starkey, who was the executor of the estate of L. Ron Hubbard and who was also Miscavige's sidekick for many years, was actually in the hole. And Mike Rinder knew he was in the hole, suffering terribly, because he was in there with him. Now, when it came about for Tom Cruise's wedding to Katie Holmes, he was pulled out of the hole, Starkey, and he was flown to Italy to participate in the so-called wedding of the century, whereupon he got drunk at the reception and tried to hit on Brooke Shields, and Brooke Shields' husband, Chris Henchy, actually complained to David Miscavige. And then everyone in the hole, back in the hole still, while this wedding was going on, was punished because of Starkey's behaviour. Look, you could go on and on and on about this horror, but basically the upshot is that no one would talk to Leah Remini on the way home in the plane, and she was called in and she was sort of raked over the coals. She had to pay a massive amount of money. She had to undergo all these studies and retraining and disciplinary programs and, just truly, truly horrible what they put her through, all because she reported what was really happening at the wedding to other Scientologists. And it's interesting that actually Katie Holmes did a report on Leah Remini and said that she just totally destroyed the wedding. Now, we don't know how much duress Katie Holmes was under, but you do get the impression that Nicole Kidman and Katie Holmes, probably for a certain amount of time, and they may have had good reason for this, but they were conveniently, with outward appearances, drinking the Kool-Aid. They were going along with things. Nicole Kidman in particular used to love hanging out with Tom at the Celebrity Centre, and she must have known just the extent to the way people were sort of going out of their way to help them, and also their household staff. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's a convenient blind eye. I think I would have been questioning a lot more, a lot sooner, and taking a lot more action. But maybe that's just me. Let me know what you think about the whole thing. What do you think? Do you think you would have cottoned on a lot sooner and taken action and sort of queried things and wondered what was happening a lot sooner? I don't know. Let me know. And I'll see you again very soon. Bye.